Introduction. The gap between talkers and doers. While they're talking about doing it, you're already 3 steps ahead. That's not arrogance, that's strategy. That's the difference between people who announce their plans at dinner parties and people who show up with results that speak for themselves. Here's what nobody tells you about success. The moment you start talking about what you're going to do, you've already lost precious time that you could have spent actually doing it. While you're crafting the perfect social media post about your new business venture, someone else has already made their first sale. While you're telling your friends about your fitness goals, someone else has already completed their morning workout. While you're explaining your 5-year plan to anyone who will listen, someone else is executing month 1. Let me tell you about 2 people I observed early in my career. We'll call them Marcus and David. Both joined the same startup on the same day as junior developers. Both had similar skills, similar backgrounds, similar ambitions to eventually start their own tech companies. Marcus was a talker. Every lunch break, he'd share his elaborate plans for the app he was going to build. He'd sketch out features on napkins, discuss his monetization strategy, explain his target market. He created a Twitter account to document his founder journey before he'd written a single line of code. He told everyone who would listen about his vision. 6 months later, he was still talking about the same app, still refining his pitch, still waiting for the perfect time to start. David was different. He never mentioned anything about side projects. He showed up, did his work, went home. People assumed he was just focused on his day job, content with being an employee. What they didn't know was that David was waking up at 5 every morning to work on his own project. He was building, testing, iterating. He failed fast, learned quickly, and adjusted constantly. No announcements, no updates. Just consistent, quiet execution. 12 months after they both joined the company, David gave his 2 weeks' notice. His app had gained traction. He had real users, real revenue, and real investors interested in funding his growth. Marcus was stunned. "Why didn't you tell anyone you were working on something?" he asked. David's response was simple. "I was too busy building it to talk about it." That's the gap this audiobook is about. The gap between intention and execution, between performance and substance, between talking about success and creating it. Marcus spent a year managing perceptions and refining his pitch. David spent that same year making 1,000 small decisions, fixing 1,000 small problems, and building something that actually worked. The tragic part? Marcus genuinely believed he was making progress. All those conversations felt productive. All that planning felt important. All that social validation from people who liked his ideas felt like momentum. But none of it moved him closer to his actual goal. He was running on a treadmill, mistaking motion for movement. This pattern repeats itself across every domain of achievement. I've watched it happen in fitness, where people post transformation announcements before they've lost a single pound. I've seen it in creative fields, where artists spend more time building their brand than developing their craft. I've observed it in investing, where people broadcast their strategies and then wonder why they stop working. The story is always the same. Announcement precedes execution, and execution never catches up. Consider the story of Sarah, a marketing manager who decided she wanted to write a book. She told everyone about it. She changed her social media bio to aspiring author. She posted updates about her writing routine, shared quotes about the writing process, joined online writing communities where she talked extensively about her book idea. She did everything except consistently write. 2 years later, she had written 30 pages and 1,000 social media posts about writing. Compare this to Michael, who had the same goal at the same time. He told exactly 3 people, his wife, his best friend, and a published author he respected. Then he disappeared into his work. Every morning before his day job, he wrote. Some days were productive, some weren't. He didn't document the process or share his progress. He just showed up and did the work. 18 months later, he had a complete manuscript. 6 months after that, he had a publishing deal. The difference wasn't talent or circumstances. Sarah and Michael were equally capable. The difference was how they allocated their energy. Sarah spent her energy on the performance of being a writer. Michael spent his energy on the practice of writing. Sarah optimized for looking productive. Michael optimized for being productive. This audiobook is about closing that gap. It's about becoming the person who moves in silence and arrives with power. It's about understanding that your competitive advantage isn't just what you know or what you can do, it's what you keep to yourself while you're building it. And here's the counterintuitive truth. In a world where everyone is broadcasting everything, your silence becomes your strength. While your competitors are giving away their playbook on social media, you're executing yours in private. While others are managing their personal brand, you're building your actual capabilities. While everyone else is performing productivity, you're being productive. Think about the most significant achievements in human history. The Manhattan Project that developed the first atomic bomb was conducted in complete secrecy with thousands of people working on it. Steve Jobs and his team developed the first iPhone in a locked room with security clearances, revealing nothing until the device was ready to launch. Athletes preparing for the Olympics train for years in relative obscurity before competing on the world stage. Authors write entire novels before showing anyone. Investors accumulate positions in undervalued companies before the market catches on. In every case, the pattern is the same. Significant work happens in private. Public recognition is the result, not the process. The reveal comes after the building, not during it. This isn't coincidence, it's strategy. This approach violates every instinct of our modern social media culture. We've been conditioned to document everything, share constantly, and measure our worth by our visibility. We've confused presence with progress, activity with achievement, broadcasting with building. This audiobook challenges that paradigm. It argues that in a world of constant noise, silence is subversive. In an environment of perpetual performance, genuine work is revolutionary. In a culture of announcement, execution is exceptional. Throughout these chapters, you'll discover why the most successful people in every field share a common trait. They perfect their craft in private before they perform in public. You'll learn why announcing your goals actually makes you less likely to achieve them. You'll understand how operational security isn't just for military missions, but for any competitive endeavor where surprise and preparation create advantage. Most importantly, you'll learn the practical disciplines that allow you to work in silence even when every instinct is screaming at you to share, to announce, to seek validation. Because knowing you should be quiet and actually staying quiet are two very different things. The path forward requires 3 fundamental shifts in how you think about achievement. First, you must reconceptualize silence not as absence, but as strategy. You're not keeping quiet because you're insecure or uncertain. You're keeping quiet because you understand that discretion is a competitive advantage. Every piece of information you don't share is leverage you maintain. Second, you must redefine productivity away from visible activity and toward measurable progress. The question isn't, what can I show people I'm doing? The question is, what am I actually accomplishing? The person with an impressive LinkedIn post about their goals is less productive than the person who's quietly making progress toward those goals. Third, you must recalibrate your source of motivation from external validation to internal satisfaction. The dopamine hit from social media likes is temporary and ultimately hollow. The deep satisfaction of genuine achievement is lasting and substantial. One makes you dependent on others' approval. The other makes you independent and resilient. These shifts aren't easy. They require swimming against powerful cultural currents. They demand that you resist the constant pull toward performance and visibility. They ask you to trust that your work will eventually speak for itself, even when no one is currently listening. But the rewards are worth it. When you work in silence, you create space for depth. When you execute without announcement, you maintain the element of surprise. When you build without broadcasting, you protect your energy for what matters. And when you finally reveal what you've been working on, the impact is undeniable because the work is substantial. This is your invitation to a different path. Not easier, but more effective. Not more comfortable, but more rewarding. Not more popular, but more powerful. While they're talking about doing it, you'll be 3 steps ahead. Not because you announced that you would be, but because you quietly chose to be. Chapter 1. The Cost of Announcement. Every word you speak about your plans costs you energy that should be going into execution. Think about the last time you told someone about a goal you had. Maybe it was a career change, a creative project, or a personal transformation. Remember that feeling you got when they responded positively, that little hit of validation, that surge of pride, that sense of accomplishment from their encouragement. That feeling is a trap. Psychologists call it social reality. When you announce your intentions and receive positive feedback, your brain experiences a reward response similar to actually achieving the goal. You get a dopamine hit from the conversation itself. The problem? Your brain now has less motivation to do the actual work because it's already received some of the emotional payoff. This phenomenon has been studied extensively. In 2009, researchers at New York University conducted experiments where they had participants write down personal goals. One group was asked to announce their goals to the room and received acknowledgement from others. The other group kept their goals private. Then both groups were given time to work toward their goals. The results were striking. Those who had announced their goals spent significantly less time working on them and reported feeling less motivated to continue. Meanwhile, those who kept their goals private worked longer and more intensely. The researchers concluded that announcing goals creates a premature sense of completeness that undermines follow-through. Let me share a real-world example. James was a corporate attorney who dreamed of transitioning into real estate development. For 2 years, he talked about this dream constantly. At networking events, he'd explain his detailed plan to leave law and build an investment portfolio. At family gatherings, he'd discuss properties he was planning to purchase. On LinkedIn, he'd share articles about real estate investing with commentary about his future in the industry. All this talking felt like progress. He was putting himself out there. He was building his brand in the real estate space. He was networking with people in the industry. But 2 years later, he hadn't purchased a single property. He hadn't taken a single concrete step toward his goal. He'd spent hundreds of hours talking about real estate and 0 hours actually doing real estate. Then something shifted. He attended a seminar where the instructor made a simple point. Everyone in this room who's successful in real estate has one thing in common. At some point, they stopped talking about investing and started investing. The timing wasn't perfect. The conditions weren't ideal, but they pulled the trigger. James went quiet. He stopped posting on LinkedIn about real estate. He stopped bringing it up at parties. He stopped explaining his grand vision to anyone who would listen. Instead, he started analyzing deals. He made offers on properties. He got rejected, learned from those rejections, and made better offers. He made mistakes, lost some money, and gained experience that couldn't be acquired through conversation. 18 months later, James owned 4 rental properties and had left his law practice. When former colleagues expressed surprise, asking why he never mentioned he was doing this, he simply said, "I was too busy doing it to talk about it." The transformation happened not when he started talking about change, but when he stopped talking and started changing. But there's another cost to announcement that's even more insidious. You're giving away your strategic advantage. When you tell people what you're working on, you invite their opinions, their doubts, and their limitations into your process. You open yourself up to their fears masquerading as practical advice. You give them the opportunity to talk you out of taking risks they would never take themselves. You let their ceiling become your ceiling. Consider the case of Rachel, a graphic designer who decided to start a consulting business. She made the mistake of announcing this plan at a family dinner. The responses came fast. Her brother, who had never run a business. "The market is really saturated right now. Are you sure there's demand?" Her mother, who valued security above all. "But you have such a stable job. What about health insurance?" Her uncle, who had failed at a business 20 years ago. "I tried something like that once. Let me tell you why it won't work." None of these people meant harm. They genuinely cared about Rachel and wanted to protect her from disappointment. But their protection came in the form of projecting their own limitations onto her possibilities. Their fear of failure became her hesitation. Their risk aversion became her doubt. Their lack of belief became her question marks. Rachel spent the next 6 months trying to address every concern that had been raised at that dinner. She over-researched the market. She delayed quitting her job while she built a financial cushion that kept growing because it never felt quite sufficient. She created elaborate contingency plans for scenarios that were unlikely to occur. All of this felt responsible, but it was really just fear dressed up as prudence. Meanwhile, her colleague Jennifer had the same business idea at the same time. Jennifer told exactly 2 people. A friend who had successfully started a similar business and her spouse. She ignored everyone else's opinions because she never solicited them. She quit her job 3 months after deciding to start her business. She made mistakes that Rachel's excessive planning couldn't have prevented anyway. But she learned from those mistakes in real time and adjusted. A year later, Jennifer had a thriving consulting practice with recurring clients and growing revenue. Rachel was still at her job, still planning, still addressing the concerns that her family had raised. The tragedy wasn't that Rachel failed. The tragedy was that she never even started because she let other people's limitations become her own. The most dangerous person in your life isn't the one who openly doubts you. It's the one who supports you with their words, but subtly plants seeds of limitation with their realism. The friend who says, "That sounds amazing, but have you thought about?" The family member who says, "I'm proud of you, but maybe you should." The colleague who says, "Great idea, but in the real world." These people aren't trying to hold you back. They're just projecting their own limitations onto your possibilities. And the moment you start explaining yourself to them, you've invited those limitations into your own mind. Here's a pattern I've observed repeatedly. The people who give you the most caution about your ambitious plans are usually the people who have never accomplished anything ambitious themselves. The person who tells you that starting a business is too risky has never started a business. The person who tells you that changing careers at your age is unrealistic has never changed careers. The person who tells you that your creative project won't succeed has never created anything. They're not speaking from experience, they're speaking from fear. And their fear is contagious if you give it space in your mind by inviting their input through announcement. There's also a more subtle psychological cost to announcement. Accountability becomes performance. When you tell people your goals, you create a situation where you're now accountable not just to yourself and your objectives, but to their expectations and their timeline. You're not just pursuing your goal, you're managing other people's perception of your pursuit. This creates enormous psychological pressure that drains energy from execution. Now you're worried about how it looks that you haven't achieved the goal yet. You're crafting explanations for why it's taking longer than you initially suggested. You're managing their disappointment or their doubt. All of this is emotional labor that has nothing to do with actually achieving your goal. I watched this play out with Daniel, an aspiring novelist. He announced on social media that he was going to write a book in a year. He posted updates about his word count. He shared snippets of his process. He documented his journey publicly. This created a toxic dynamic. On days when he didn't write, he felt guilty, not because he wasn't making progress toward his goal, but because he wasn't producing content for his audience. His writing became performative. He found himself choosing writing sessions that would make good social media posts over writing sessions that would actually improve his manuscript. He started caring more about how his process looked than whether his process was effective. Worse, as the year-end deadline approached and he wasn't finished, the pressure intensified. He was facing public failure. The stress of this impending embarrassment actually made him less productive, not more. He started avoiding writing because it reminded him of the commitment he'd made publicly and wasn't going to keep. Compare this to his friend Marcus, who decided to write a novel at the same time. Marcus told no one, except his writing partner. When he didn't write for a week, the only person who knew was himself. He felt no social pressure, just personal accountability. This allowed him to be honest about his process. Some weeks he wrote prolifically. Some weeks he didn't write at all. He didn't have to perform consistency, he just had to maintain eventual progress. Marcus finished his novel in 14 months. Not the 12 he'd initially hoped for, but he finished. And because no one knew he was writing it, no one knew he missed his deadline. The only thing people saw was the finished novel. Daniel, on the other hand, abandoned his project after 10 months, exhausted by the pressure of public accountability that he had created for himself through announcement. Here's the truth that successful people understand. Your plans don't need approval, they need execution. Your goals don't need validation, they need work. Your dreams don't need an audience, they need action. The energy you spend announcing, explaining, and defending your plans is energy that isn't going into executing those plans. Every conversation where you describe what you're going to do is time you're not spending actually doing it. Every social media post about your intentions is mental bandwidth that isn't being directed toward results. This isn't to say you should never discuss your goals with anyone. Strategic sharing with carefully chosen people can be valuable, and we'll explore that later. But indiscriminate announcement to anyone who will listen is almost always counterproductive. So stop performing your ambitions and start building them. Stop seeking permission and start taking action. Stop managing other people's perception of your goals and start managing your actual progress toward them. The cost of announcement is measured not in dollars, but in diluted focus, drained motivation, and delayed execution. Every word you speak about what you're going to do is a word you're not speaking through the results you've created. Choose results over rhetoric. Choose execution over explanation. Choose building over broadcasting. Because while you're explaining what you're going to do, someone else is already doing it, and they're 3 steps ahead. Chapter 2. The Power of Operational Security. The military has a term for this, operational security, OPSEC. It's the practice of keeping sensitive information away from people who could use it against you. Your dreams deserve the same protection as military operations. Because here's what happens when you broadcast your moves. You don't just lose motivation and invite doubt. You also create competition, obstacles, and interference that didn't need to exist. Let me tell you about 2 entrepreneurs who launched competing products in the same small market. We'll call them Alex and Jordan. Alex believed in transparency. He documented his entire product development process publicly. He shared his target customer profile on his blog. He posted about features he was adding, pricing strategies he was considering, and launch timelines he was planning. He saw this transparency as a way to build an audience before he had a product. He thought he was being smart by creating buzz. Jordan took a different approach. He built in complete silence. Nobody knew what he was working on, when he was launching, or how he was positioning his product. The first time anyone heard about his business was when he launched it. Here's what happened. Every feature Alex announced publicly was quickly replicated by Jordan, who had more resources and faster development capability. Every pricing strategy Alex discussed openly was undercut by Jordan, who could afford lower margins in the short term to capture market share. Every partnership Alex mentioned he was pursuing was quickly approached by Jordan with better terms. By the time Alex launched, Jordan had already been in market for 2 weeks with a product that looked suspiciously similar to what Alex had been describing for months. Jordan had used Alex's transparency against him, essentially getting free market research and competitive intelligence while revealing nothing about his own plans. Alex had handed his competitor a complete playbook. Jordan had simply executed it faster and better. The result? Jordan's business thrived, while Alex struggled to differentiate a product that was no longer novel because Jordan had already introduced similar features. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. It happens constantly in business, in creative fields, in real estate, in investing, in any domain where what you're doing has value and others could replicate or interfere with it. That business idea you mentioned at a networking event. Someone just filed for a similar trademark. That promotion you're gunning for that you told your coworker about, they just started positioning themselves for the same role. That real estate deal you were excited about, the seller just got 3 other offers because word travels. That investment thesis you shared, others are now front-running you into the same positions. Information is power, and when you give away information about your next move, you're giving away power. You're allowing other people to get ahead of you, to prepare for you, to compete with you, or to sabotage you, sometimes without even meaning to. This isn't about paranoia. It's about strategy. It's about understanding that in a competitive world, discretion is an advantage. The less people know about what you're building, the less they can interfere with it. The less they know about where you're going, the less they can block your path or race you to the destination. Consider the story of Chen, a product manager at a tech company. Chen had an idea for an internal tool that could improve efficiency across multiple departments. He mentioned this idea casually to his colleague in another department. That colleague thought it was a great idea and mentioned it to their manager. That manager, seeing an opportunity to look innovative to leadership, presented a similar proposal to executives the following week, claiming credit for the concept. By the time Chen formally proposed his idea, he was told that another team was already working on it. He'd lost the opportunity to lead the project he'd conceived because he'd shared the idea before he was ready to act on it. The lesson? Operational security matters even in environments you consider friendly. Think about the most successful product launches, the most effective business strategies, the most impressive personal transformations. They all have one thing in common. They were developed in private and revealed only when they were ready. Apple doesn't announce what iPhone they're working on 2 years in advance. They develop it in secret with fanatical security measures and reveal it only when it's ready to ship. Why? Because they know that if competitors knew what features they were developing, those competitors would rush to develop similar features, eliminating Apple's advantage. The secrecy isn't about being mysterious. It's about maintaining competitive advantage. Consider athletes at the highest levels of competition. They don't announce their training methods to their competitors. Olympic swimmers don't broadcast the specific techniques they're refining. Professional fighters don't share the game plans they're developing for upcoming matches. Revealing your preparation is essentially giving your competition a roadmap to counter you. Investors don't broadcast which stocks they're buying before they've accumulated their positions. Warren Buffett doesn't announce he's accumulating shares in a company until he's legally required to disclose his holdings. Why? Because if he announced his intentions early, the stock price would rise before he finished buying, costing him millions. The size of the position he can build depends on other people not knowing he's building it. This is operational security in action. This is the discipline of keeping your moves private until they're inevitable. This is understanding that timing of disclosure is as important as what you're doing. And here's the beautiful part. When you stop talking about what you're going to do and start quietly doing it, people stop being able to interfere. They can't offer unsolicited advice if they don't know what you're working on. They can't compete with you if they don't know you're in the race. They can't doubt you if they don't know what you're attempting. They can't steal your ideas if they don't know what your ideas are. Let me share the story of Maria, a real estate investor who learned this lesson the hard way. Early in her investing career, she would share properties she was analyzing with her real estate networking group. She thought this was what you were supposed to do: collaborate, share insights, learn together. What happened repeatedly was that she would identify an undervalued property, share her analysis showing why it was a good deal, and then discover that someone from her networking group had already made an offer before she could. They weren't trying to be malicious. They just saw an opportunity she'd identified and moved on it. But the result was the same. Her analysis was benefiting others while she wasn't getting any deals done. Maria changed her approach. She stopped sharing properties she was seriously interested in. She kept her analysis private. She made offers quietly. Only after she'd successfully closed on a property would she discuss it with others, and even then, only in terms of lessons learned, not details that would give insight into her current strategy. The result? Her acquisition rate increased dramatically. She was no longer competing against people she had essentially educated about which properties to pursue. Her operational security directly translated to better results. This principle extends beyond business into personal development. I've watched people announce their fitness transformations on social media, complete with before photos and ambitious timelines. This creates a dynamic where they're now not just accountable to themselves but to everyone watching. The pressure of this public commitment often backfires. Consider Tom and Luis, both of whom decided to lose significant weight around the same time. Tom posted about it extensively on Facebook. He shared his starting weight, his goal weight, his meal plans, his workout schedule. He created public accountability, thinking it would motivate him. What actually happened was that the public nature of his commitment created anxiety. When he had setbacks, and everyone has setbacks, he felt like he was failing publicly. When progress was slower than he'd suggested in his initial announcement, he felt embarrassed. Eventually, the psychological burden of public observation made him want to avoid the gym because the gym reminded him of the commitment he'd made publicly and wasn't keeping. Luis took a different approach. He told exactly 2 people, his doctor and his training partner. Then he disappeared into the work. Some weeks he was consistent, some weeks he wasn't. But because no one was watching, he didn't have to perform consistency. He just had to maintain eventual progress. Setbacks were private learning experiences, not public failures. He could adjust his approach without having to explain why to an audience. 15 months later, Luis had lost 80 pounds and completely transformed his health. Tom had lost 15 pounds, gained them back, and stopped going to the gym entirely. The difference wasn't commitment or capability, it was operational security. Luis's private process allowed him to be honest with himself and adjust. Tom's public process created pressure that became counterproductive. The principle here is universal. The more people who know your plans, the more energy you have to spend managing their perception of your progress. The fewer people who know, the more energy you can direct toward actual progress. This doesn't mean never collaborating or never seeking input. It means being strategic about who gets information, when they get it, and why they're getting it. Not everyone deserves access to your plans. Most people don't. They haven't earned it through demonstrated ability to help you or through proven discretion. By the time people find out what you were building, you're already 3 steps ahead, and they're trying to catch up to where you already were. That's the power of operational security. That's the advantage of discretion. That's why silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. Chapter 3. The discipline of silence. Silence is not the absence of communication. It's the presence of focus. When you stop spending energy on explaining yourself, defending yourself, or promoting yourself, all that energy becomes available for the actual work. This is the discipline that separates people who talk about success from people who achieve it. But let's be clear, this discipline is hard. Humans are social creatures. We're wired to share, to connect, to seek validation from our tribe. Going against that instinct requires conscious effort and continuous practice. The urge to announce your plans is strong because it serves psychological needs that are deeply rooted in our evolution. When we share our goals, we're seeking social bonding, establishing status, and creating accountability. These are legitimate needs. The problem is that we're trying to meet them in a way that undermines our actual success. Let me tell you about Catherine, a mid-level manager who decided she wanted to become a senior executive at her company. Her path forward was clear. She needed to lead a major cross-functional initiative that would demonstrate her strategic capabilities and executive presence. Catherine's first instinct was to talk about her ambitions openly. She mentioned to colleagues that she was ready for the next level. She made sure her boss knew she was interested in executive roles. She posted on LinkedIn about leadership and strategic thinking. All of this felt proactive. She was putting herself out there. But something interesting happened. The more she talked about wanting to be an executive, the less seriously people took her current contributions. Her colleagues started viewing her through the lens of her ambitions rather than her actions. Some became subtly competitive, seeing her as a threat. Others became dismissive, viewing her ambition as premature. Her visibility increased, but her effectiveness decreased. Then Catherine's mentor gave her uncomfortable advice. Stop talking about what you want to become and start quietly demonstrating that you already are what you want to become. Executives don't announce their executive material. They just exhibit executive capabilities. Catherine went silent about her ambitions. She stopped mentioning her career goals. She stopped posting about leadership on social media. She stopped making sure everyone knew she wanted advancement. Instead, she focused entirely on leading the cross-functional initiative she'd been assigned. She made decisions, solved problems, influenced stakeholders, and delivered results, all without commentary about what it meant for her career trajectory. 18 months later, she was promoted. When she was announced as a new vice president, several colleagues were surprised. They hadn't seen it coming because she hadn't been performing the ambition. She'd been quietly embodying the capabilities that the role required. The promotion wasn't a reward for wanting to be an executive, it was recognition that she already was one. So how do you develop the discipline of silence when every instinct is pulling you towards sharing? First, you need to find alternative ways to meet those social and psychological needs. Instead of seeking validation from announcing your goals, seek validation from making progress on them. Instead of establishing status through your intentions, establish it through your results. Instead of creating accountability through public declarations, create it through private commitments with yourself or with one carefully chosen accountability partner who has already achieved what you're trying to achieve. Let me give you a practical example. David, a software engineer, wanted to transition into machine learning. His initial instinct was to post on LinkedIn about his machine learning journey, join online communities to discuss his learning process, and make sure everyone knew about his transition. Instead, he chose a different path. He identified one person, a machine learning engineer he respected, and asked if they would mentor him informally. This one person became his source of accountability and guidance. To everyone else, David said nothing about his transition. He just quietly started taking courses, working on projects, and building capabilities. The difference was dramatic. With his mentor, David had productive technical conversations that actually advanced his learning. He got specific feedback on his projects. He had someone who could answer questions and point him toward resources. This was high-signal information exchange with someone positioned to help. If he'd taken the public route, he would have had dozens of shallow interactions with people who meant well but couldn't really help. He would have spent hours crafting updates about his progress instead of making progress. He would have received generic encouragement that felt good but didn't make him better. 8 months later, David accepted a machine learning engineering role at a major tech company. His LinkedIn remained mostly dormant throughout his transition. The first most people heard about his pivot was when he updated his job title. No journey posts, no study updates, just results. Second, you need to reframe silence not as isolation, but as strategic positioning. You're not keeping quiet because you're ashamed of your goals or because you lack confidence. You're keeping quiet because you understand that loose lips sink ships. You're practicing operational security because you know that discretion is a competitive advantage. This reframe is crucial because it converts silence from deprivation into strategy. You're not denying yourself social connection, you're protecting your competitive edge. You're not hiding, you're positioning. You're not being antisocial, you're being selective. Consider how elite special forces operators think about information security. They don't avoid talking about their work because they're insecure about it. They avoid it because they understand that operational effectiveness depends on surprise, and surprise requires discretion. They're proud of their capabilities, but they don't need to broadcast them to feel validated. Their validation comes from mission success, not social recognition. You can adopt the same mindset. Your validation doesn't come from people knowing what you're working on. It comes from actually achieving what you're working toward. Your confidence doesn't depend on external acknowledgement of your intentions. It comes from internal knowledge of your capabilities and your progress. Third, you need to develop comfort with being misunderstood in the short term. When you stop announcing your plans, some people will think you've stopped being ambitious. When you stop posting about your goals on social media, some people will think you've given up. When you stop explaining what you're working on, some people will think you're not working on anything. Let them think that. Their misunderstanding is not your problem. Your results will eventually clarify everything. And in the meantime, their underestimation of you is actually working in your favor. While they think you're idle, you're building. While they think you've given up, you're getting ahead. While they think nothing is happening, everything is happening. I watched this play out with Nicole, a corporate trainer who decided to start her own consulting business. She'd been talking about this possibility for years, so when she finally got serious about it but stopped talking about it, people assumed she'd abandoned the idea. Former colleagues thought she'd decided to stay in her corporate role. Friends thought she'd given up on entrepreneurship. What Nicole was actually doing was building her business systematically and quietly. She was developing her methodology, creating her materials, securing her first clients, and establishing her operational systems. All of this required intense focus that would have been fragmented if she'd been managing other people's perception of her progress. When she finally announced that she was leaving her corporate job to run her consulting firm full-time, people were shocked. "I didn't even know you were working on this," they said. Her response was simple. I was too busy building it to talk about it. The misunderstanding during her building phase worked to her advantage in multiple ways, because no one knew she was starting a business. No one was competing with her for the clients she was cultivating, because no one knew her plans. No one was offering unhelpful advice that would have slowed her down. Because no one knew her timeline. No one was creating pressure around when she should launch. This is the discipline of silence, staying focused on your work regardless of what others think about your lack of announcements. It's the ability to delay gratification, not just the gratification of results, but the gratification of recognition. It's choosing the long-term satisfaction of achievement over the short-term pleasure of acknowledgement. Most people can't do this. They need the immediate feedback loop of social validation. They need to post about their gym session to feel like they worked out. They need to announce their reading list to feel like they're learning. They need to broadcast their business plans to feel like they're entrepreneurial. But you're not most people. You understand that the workout that counts is the one nobody sees. The learning that matters is the knowledge that changes your thinking, not the books you pose with on Instagram. The business that succeeds is the one that's built in silence and launched with substance. This discipline has layers. The first layer is simply not announcing your plans. That's the starting point. But the deeper discipline is maintaining that silence even when it would be easy and tempting to break it. When someone asks what you're working on, the discipline is saying a few different things instead of launching into a detailed explanation. When you make progress, the discipline is experiencing that satisfaction privately instead of immediately posting about it. When you face setbacks, the discipline is working through them without seeking sympathy or sharing your struggles publicly. Each of these moments is a test. Each time you choose silence over sharing, you're strengthening the discipline. Each time you resist the urge to announce, you're redirecting that energy toward execution. Each time you keep your progress private, you're maintaining your strategic advantage. This doesn't mean you never celebrate or never share, but the timing matters. You celebrate internally or with your carefully chosen confidence until the work is complete. You share the outcome, not the process. You reveal results, not intentions. The discipline of silence is ultimately about understanding what deserves your energy. Explaining yourself to people who aren't in position to help you doesn't deserve your energy. Managing other people's expectations about your timeline doesn't deserve your energy. Defending your choices to people who haven't achieved what you're attempting doesn't deserve your energy. What deserves your energy is the work itself. The learning, the practicing, the building, the failing, the adjusting, the persisting. That's where your attention should go. That's where your effort should be directed. That's what will determine your success. Everything else is noise. And the discipline of silence is about tuning out that noise so you can focus on the signal. Chapter 4: Execution while others deliberate. Here's what being 3 steps ahead actually looks like in practice. Step 1. While they're talking about starting, you've already started. Step 2. While they're planning to start, you're already iterating based on real feedback. Step 3. While they're finally starting, you're already succeeding, or you've already failed, learned, and started something better. This is the compound advantage of immediate action over prolonged preparation. Let me tell you about 2 aspiring entrepreneurs I knew who both had the same business idea at roughly the same time. They were acquaintances, not close friends, so they didn't know they were both working on similar concepts. We'll call them Philip and Robert. Philip approached his business idea the way most people do, with extensive preparation. He spent 3 months researching the market. He created detailed financial projections going out 5 years. He wrote a comprehensive business plan that covered every contingency he could imagine. He took online courses about entrepreneurship. He read books about starting businesses. He attended networking events to lay the groundwork for his future launch. All of this felt productive. Philip was learning, planning, and preparing. He told himself he was being smart and thorough. He wasn't rushing into anything. He was doing his due diligence. He would launch when he was ready. Robert took a different approach. He spent about a week doing basic market research, just enough to confirm there was demand and to understand who his target customers were. Then he built a minimum viable version of his product using the simplest tools available. It wasn't pretty. It had limited functionality, but it worked, and it solved the core problem his customers had. 2 weeks after having the idea, Robert was in market with paying customers. The first version of his product had obvious flaws. Customers pointed them out immediately. But they were paying customers, which meant Robert was learning what mattered from people who had actual skin in the game, not from hypothetical scenarios in a business plan. Over the next 3 months, the same 3 months Philip spent preparing, Robert went through 5 iterations of his product. Each iteration was informed by real customer feedback. Each version solved real problems that customers actually had, not problems Robert imagined they might have. By month 3, Robert had a product that customers loved, consistent revenue, and a roadmap informed by actual market demand. Meanwhile, Philip was just finishing his business plan and feeling ready to start building his product. He was finally prepared to begin. But now he was 3 months behind Robert. Worse, the market had spoken during those 3 months, and it had given Robert information that Philip's research hadn't revealed. Robert knew exactly what features customers valued because he'd tested them. Philip was guessing based on research about what customers might value. The gap only widened from there. By the time Philip launched 6 months after Robert had already established customer relationships, refined his value proposition, built a reputation in the market, and was several versions ahead in product development. Philip's more polished initial launch couldn't compete with Robert's battle-tested, market-validated product and established customer base. This is what execution while others deliberate looks like. It's not about being reckless. Robert didn't launch blindly. He did basic research, but he understood something crucial. You learn more from 1 hour of execution than from 100 hours of planning. Most people get stuck in the planning phase because planning feels like progress without requiring actual risk. Planning is safe. Planning is comfortable. Planning doesn't expose you to failure or criticism. You can plan for years and never face the discomfort of real-world feedback. But here's the problem. Plans don't survive contact with reality. No matter how much you prepare, the moment you start executing, you'll discover things you didn't anticipate. The market will respond differently than you expected. Your skills will be tested in ways you didn't prepare for. Obstacles will appear that weren't in your plan. This means that excessive planning is not just inefficient, it's actually counterproductive. You're spending time perfecting a strategy that will immediately become obsolete the moment you implement it. Consider the story of 2 writers, both with the goal of writing and publishing a novel. Margaret spent a year attending writing workshops, reading books about craft, and developing her characters and plot in elaborate detail. She had notebooks full of backstory for every character. She had detailed outlines of every scene. She had done extensive research to ensure historical accuracy. She was preparing to write. Eleanor took a different approach. She spent 1 weekend outlining her basic plot and character arcs. Then she started writing. Her first draft was rough. Her characters evolved as she wrote them. Her plot had holes she had to figure out as she went. It was messy, imperfect work. But here's what happened. Margaret spent so much time preparing that when she finally sat down to write, the project felt overwhelming. She had built up so much expectation through her preparation that the actual writing couldn't live up to it. She also discovered that much of her preparation didn't actually help. Characters she'd developed extensively didn't work in the actual narrative. Plot points she'd carefully planned felt contrived when she tried to execute them. Elena, on the other hand, was learning as she went. She would write a scene, realize it didn't work, and rewrite it. She would discover through writing that a character needed to behave differently than she'd initially imagined. Her process was messy, but it was progress. And progress, even messy progress, compounds. 12 months after they both started, Eleanor had a complete first draft that she was revising based on beta reader feedback. Margaret was still in Chapter 3, paralyzed by the gap between her elaborate preparation and the imperfect reality of her execution. The people who get ahead understand this. They don't wait for perfect conditions or complete information. They don't need to have every detail figured out before they begin. They start with what they know, adjust based on what they learn, and iterate their way to success. While others are still debating whether the timing is right, whether they're ready, whether they should wait for one more thing to fall into place, the people who win are already in motion. They're gathering real data instead of making assumptions. They're facing actual problems instead of imagining hypothetical ones. They're building momentum instead of building anxiety. This is not about being reckless. It's about being responsive. It's about understanding that you learn more from 1 hour of execution than from 100 hours of planning. It's about knowing that action creates information, and information creates better action. Think about it this way. If you're trying to learn to swim, you can read every book about swimming technique, watch every video, study every Olympic swimmer's form. But none of that actually teaches you to swim. You only learn to swim by getting in the water, experiencing the resistance, feeling the buoyancy, coordinating your movements in real time. Success in any domain works the same way. You can study success principles, read biographies of successful people, take courses on entrepreneurship or investing or fitness or whatever you're pursuing. But you only truly learn by doing, and the sooner you start doing, the sooner you start learning what actually works. Let me share another example from a different domain. Two people, both wanting to get in better shape, both starting from similar fitness levels. James joins a gym and spends 2 weeks researching the optimal workout program. He reads articles comparing different training philosophies. He watches videos about proper form. He calculates his macros and designs a perfect nutrition plan. He's getting ready to start working out. Marcus joins the same gym and just starts working out. His form isn't perfect. His program isn't optimized. His nutrition isn't dialed in, but he's showing up and putting in work. His body is adapting to the stress of exercise. He's building habits and momentum. 2 weeks later, James is finally ready to start his carefully designed program. Marcus has been working out for 2 weeks and has already made adjustments based on what he's learning about how his body responds. He's discovered which exercises work well for him and which don't. He's figured out what pre-workout nutrition gives him energy and what doesn't. He's learned that he prefers morning workouts over evening ones. 6 months later, Marcus has transformed his physique. James has the best designed program that he's inconsistently executing because the theoretical perfection he spent so long creating doesn't match the practical reality of his life, his schedule, and his body's response. This is why being 3 steps ahead is possible. It's not because you're smarter or more talented or better prepared than others. It's because you started 3 steps earlier. While they were talking, you were doing. While they were planning, you were executing. While they were seeking permission, you were seeking progress. And here's the compounding effect. Each step gives you information that makes the next step more effective. Your first attempt might be rough, but it teaches you what works and what doesn't. Your second attempt is better because it's informed by real experience. Your third attempt is better still because you're building on actual data, not assumptions. Meanwhile, the people who are still planning are working with the same information they started with. They haven't learned anything new because they haven't done anything new. They're stuck in a loop of preparation that never leads to execution. I saw this pattern repeatedly when I worked in product development. We had teams that spent months perfecting features before releasing them to users. We had other teams that released rough versions quickly and iterated based on user feedback. Consistently, the teams that executed quickly and iterated based on real feedback built better products than the teams that tried to perfect things before release. Why? Because the teams that released quickly were learning from actual user behavior. The teams that prepared extensively were guessing about user behavior. Real data beats educated guesses every single time. This principle applies whether you're building a business, developing a skill, changing careers, or pursuing any significant goal. The faster you move from planning to execution, the faster you start gathering the real-world feedback that makes your subsequent actions more effective. Break that loop. Start now. Execute imperfectly. Learn rapidly. Iterate constantly. That's how you get 3 steps ahead and stay 3 steps ahead. The moment you finish planning and start executing is the moment you separate yourself from everyone who's still preparing. The moment you launch your imperfect version 1, while others are perfecting their theoretical version, is the moment you gain competitive advantage. The moment you're learning from real feedback while others are still operating on assumptions is the moment you move decisively ahead. While they're talking about doing it, you're not just doing it, you're already learning from having done it and applying those lessons to what you're doing next. That's not just 1 step ahead, that's 3 steps ahead. And the gap only widens with time. Chapter 5. The Reveal. Eventually, your work will speak for itself. That's when the reveal happens. Not because you choose to announce it, but because the results become undeniable. This is the moment all the silence and discipline and execution has been building toward. This is when people who dismissed you suddenly pay attention. This is when people who never knew you were working suddenly ask how you did it. This is when the work you did in private creates public recognition. And here's what makes this moment powerful. You didn't ask for it. You didn't campaign for it. You didn't post about it or promote it or plead for it. It simply arrived as the natural consequence of sustained, focused effort. Let me tell you about Jennifer, a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized company. For years, she'd been interested in data science but never mentioned it to anyone at work. While her colleagues saw her as someone focused on traditional marketing, she was spending her early mornings teaching herself Python, statistics, and machine learning. She didn't announce this learning journey on LinkedIn. She didn't mention it in team meetings. She didn't update her title to aspiring data scientist or post about her courses. She just quietly built capabilities while continuing to excel at her day job. Then, about 18 months into her learning journey, a problem arose at her company. The marketing team needed to predict customer churn, but had no one with the technical skills to build a predictive model. Previous attempts to hire consultants had been expensive and yielded poor results. Jennifer said quietly in a meeting, "I think I can build that model." Her manager was confused. "You know how to do that?" Jennifer pulled up a laptop and over the next week built a customer churn prediction model that was more accurate than anything the consultants had produced. The reveal wasn't planned. She didn't time it for maximum impact. The opportunity presented itself, and she was ready because she'd been building capability in private. The model she built didn't just solve the immediate problem, it demonstrated capabilities no one knew she had. Within 2 months, she'd transitioned into a newly created data science role at the company with a significant salary increase. Her colleagues were shocked. When did you learn data science? They asked. She just shrugged. I've been working on it for a while. This kind of recognition has a different quality than the validation you get from announcing your intentions. When people celebrate your announcement, they're really just being polite or supportive. It's social courtesy. But when people recognize your results, they're acknowledging objective reality. They're not being nice to you. They're responding to something real that you created. The difference is profound. One is about getting credit for having a plan. The other is about getting respect for executing the plan. One is about seeming ambitious. The other is about being effective. One is performative. The other is substantive. Consider the story of two colleagues competing for the same promotion. Daniel made sure everyone knew he wanted it. He mentioned his ambitions regularly, positioned himself visibly on important projects, and essentially campaigned for the role. His visibility was high, but so was the performance pressure. He was managing perceptions constantly. Sophie took a different approach. She never mentioned wanting the promotion. She just quietly demonstrated every capability the role required. She led difficult initiatives without fanfare. She solved problems others couldn't. She built relationships that made the organization more effective. All of this without commentary about what it meant for her career progression. When the promotion was announced, it went to Sophie. Daniel was frustrated. I made it clear I wanted this, he said. The hiring manager's response was revealing. We knew you wanted it, but Sophie showed us she was already doing it. The lesson: announcements create expectations. Results create recognition. Expectations are easily disappointed. Recognition of genuine achievement is lasting. And here's something interesting. When you let results speak for themselves rather than promoting them yourself, they often speak louder. There's a credibility that comes from third-party recognition that self-promotion can never achieve. When someone else tells your success story, people believe it. When you tell your success story, people suspect you're exaggerating. This is why successful people often seem humble despite their achievements. It's not false modesty. It's strategic communication. They understand that letting others discover and discuss their success creates more impact than self-promotion ever could. I watched this dynamic play out with two software engineers who both built impressive side projects. Tyler constantly promoted his project on social media. He posted updates, shared metrics, celebrated milestones. His project was good, but the constant promotion actually diminished its perceived value. People wondered why he needed to promote it so much if it was really that good. Brenda built an equally impressive project, but said nothing about it publicly. She just used it herself and shared it with a few people she thought might find it useful. Those people shared it with others. Word spread organically. When developers discovered her project, they were genuinely impressed because they'd found it through reputation, not promotion. Both projects were good, but Brenda's quiet approach made hers seem more valuable because its quality was validated by organic adoption rather than self-promotion. The market discovered its value rather than being told about its value. But there's a balance here that's important to understand. Not talking about your plans doesn't mean you can't talk about your results. Once you've achieved something, once you've built something, once you've created value that's real and tangible, you can absolutely share it. In fact, you should share it, not for validation, but for connection, contribution, and continued growth. The key is the timing and the substance. You're not talking about what you're going to do. You're sharing what you've already done. You're not seeking approval for your ideas. You're demonstrating proof of your execution. You're not performing ambition. You're documenting achievement. Let me give you a practical example of how this works. Marcus spent 6 months building a new framework for his company's customer onboarding process. He didn't mention he was working on it. He just identified the problem, developed a solution, piloted it with one team, refined it based on feedback, and then implemented it across the organization. Only after it was fully implemented and showing measurable results did he present it formally to leadership. He didn't present a plan or a proposal, he presented results. Here's what we built. Here's how it's performing. Here's the impact it's having. The recognition came not from the idea, but from the execution and results. This is how you build a reputation that precedes you. This is how you create opportunities that come looking for you instead of you having to chase them. This is how you establish credibility that compounds over time. When you consistently do work in silence and let results make noise, people start to notice a pattern. They start to see that when you're quiet, it doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means something significant is being built. Your silence becomes intriguing rather than concerning. Your discretion becomes a signal of seriousness rather than a sign of stagnation. I've observed this pattern with Sarah, a consultant who built her entire practice through this principle. She never engaged in typical consultant self-promotion. No thought leadership posts, no speaking at conferences about what clients should do, no white papers about her methodology. Instead, she just did exceptional work for her clients. She solved problems so effectively that clients told other potential clients. Her work spoke so loudly that she never needed to speak for herself. Within 3 years, she had more client demand than she could handle, all from referrals, with essentially no marketing spend. Compare this to consultants who spent massive amounts of time and money on self-promotion, speaking engagements, content marketing, networking events. They were visible, but Sarah was profitable. They were building their brand. She was building her business. They were telling people how good they were. Her clients were doing it for her. The reveal, when done right, creates a kind of dramatic impact that announcement never can. Think about the surprise product launches from companies like Apple. Years of secret development, no leaks, no hints. Then suddenly, a complete, polished product that changes the industry. The reveal creates impact precisely because no one saw it coming. You can create the same effect on a personal scale. When you've been quiet for months or years and then reveal significant achievement, the surprise amplifies the impact. People respect the discipline it took to work without validation. They appreciate the confidence it takes to let work speak for itself. They're impressed by the substance that exists rather than just the plans that were promised. This approach also protects you from a common trap: premature celebration. When you announce goals and people celebrate your announcement, you've used up some of the social capital and emotional reward that should be reserved for actual achievement. But when you reveal only completed work, the celebration is proportional to the actual accomplishment. Think about the athlete who posts about making the team versus the athlete who posts about winning the championship. One is celebrating getting the opportunity. The other is celebrating seizing the opportunity. One is about potential. The other is about performance. Which deserves more celebration? Which gets more respect? The reveal should feel inevitable, not surprising to you, but perhaps surprising to others. It should feel like the natural culmination of work you've been doing all along. It shouldn't feel like you're seeking validation. It should feel like you're sharing value. Here's a useful framework. Ask yourself, am I sharing this because I need people to know about it, or because it might genuinely help or interest them? If it's the former, wait. If it's the latter, share away. The power of the reveal comes from the gap between what people thought you were doing and what you were actually doing. The wider that gap, the more impact the reveal has. This is why silence during the building phase creates such powerful recognition during the revealing phase. While everyone else was documenting their journey, you were taking the journey. While they were performing progress, you were making progress. While they were explaining what they hoped to achieve, you were achieving it. And now, when you're ready, you reveal not plans or potential, but proof and performance. That's when the real recognition comes. That's when respect is earned. That's when your work speaks louder than words ever could. Chapter 6. Protecting your energy. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Defending your plans from other people's opinions is exhausting. Every time you tell someone what you're working on, you're opening a channel through which their doubts, fears, and limitations can flow into your psyche. Even when their response is supportive, you now have to carry their expectations along with your own goals. You have to manage their perception of your progress. You have to deal with their questions about why it's taking so long or why you haven't achieved certain milestones yet. This is emotional labor that you don't need. This is mental energy that should be going into your actual work. This is psychological bandwidth that's being wasted on explaining, defending, and managing other people's relationship to your goals. Let me tell you about Amanda, a graphic designer who decided to start a freelance business while keeping her day job. She made the mistake of telling everyone about her plans. Her parents worried about her financial security. Her friends questioned whether the market was too crowded. Her colleagues subtly implied she was betraying the company by planning to leave. Each conversation required emotional labor. She had to reassure her parents that she had a financial cushion. She had to defend her market research to skeptical friends. She had to manage her colleagues' perceptions so they wouldn't see her as already having one foot out the door. All of this was before she'd even signed her first freelance client. The mental burden became overwhelming. Every week, someone would ask her how the business was going. When progress was slower than expected, which is normal for any new venture, she felt like she was failing publicly. The questions that were meant to show support actually created pressure that made her less productive. She started dreading family dinners because she knew her parents would ask about her business, and she'd have to explain why she hadn't quit her job yet. She avoided certain friends because their skepticism was infectious and would leave her questioning her own choices. She was more guarded at work, anxious that people knew her loyalty was divided. Compare this to her friend Derek, who decided to start a similar freelance business at roughly the same time. Derek told exactly 3 people: his spouse, one friend who had successfully done the same transition, and his accountant. To everyone else, he was just Derek, the graphic designer with a day job. This selective disclosure protected his energy in multiple ways. He didn't have to defend his choices to people who had never made similar choices. He didn't have to manage his parents' anxiety. He didn't have to worry about his employer questioning his commitment. He could have slow weeks without feeling like he was disappointing an audience. When Derek eventually quit his day job to go full-time freelance, people were surprised. "I didn't know you were building a business," they said. By the time they found out, it was already successful enough that there was nothing to question or doubt. The announcement was, "I'm going full-time with my freelance business." Not, "I'm planning to maybe start a freelance business someday." One is reporting results. The other is inviting opinions. When you keep your plans private, you eliminate all of this unnecessary emotional labor. You don't have to explain slow periods because nobody knows you're in one. You don't have to defend pivots because nobody knows you've changed direction. You don't have to manage expectations because nobody has expectations to manage. This creates a kind of psychological freedom that's essential for sustained high performance. You can experiment without judgment. You can fail without embarrassment. You can change your mind without having to justify it to anyone. You can work at your own pace without pressure from people who don't understand your process. This freedom is especially important during the difficult middle phase of any significant undertaking. That long stretch between the initial excitement of starting and the eventual satisfaction of finishing. This is where most people quit. Not because the work gets too hard, but because the social pressure becomes unbearable. Think about training for a marathon. The first few weeks are exciting. You're motivated. You tell people about your training. They're supportive. The final weeks are exciting too. The race is coming up. You're tapering. People are cheering you on. But weeks 12 through 20, that's the grind. That's where it gets hard. Your body hurts. Progress plateaus. The novelty has worn off. You're not in the excited beginning anymore, but you're not at the satisfying ending yet. You're just running a lot in all kinds of weather when you don't feel like it. This is where public commitment becomes a burden. When you've told everyone you're running a marathon, you now have to face them during this difficult middle phase. People keep asking, how's the training going? And you have to say, fine, when really you mean, I'm sore and tired and questioning why I signed up for this. Their well-meaning check-ins actually make it harder because each one reminds you of the public commitment you made and the gap between where you are and where you said you'd be. Compare this to someone who's training for the same marathon but told almost no one. For them, the middle phase is just work. Hard work, yes, but it's not complicated by social performance. They can have bad weeks without explaining them to anyone. They can adjust their training plan without justifying the changes. If they ultimately decide not to run the race, it's a private decision, not a public failure. I've seen this dynamic destroy countless worthwhile projects and goals. People start with genuine enthusiasm, announce their plans publicly to create accountability, and then find that the social pressure of that accountability actually undermines their ability to execute. The project becomes associated with stress rather than satisfaction. The goal becomes a source of anxiety rather than motivation. Lisa experienced this with her goal to learn Spanish. She posted on social media about her commitment to become fluent. Friends and family were supportive, often asking her, ¿Cómo estás?, or making jokes in Spanish. Their attention was meant to be encouraging, but it created performance pressure. Every interaction became a test. She felt self-conscious speaking Spanish around people who knew about her goal because she was aware they were evaluating her progress. When she had busy weeks and didn't study much, she felt guilty, not just to herself, but to the audience she'd created. The social dimension of her goal transformed what should have been an enjoyable learning process into a performance she was constantly being evaluated on. Her neighbor Rosa had the same goal at the same time, but told no one except the tutor she hired. Rosa's learning process was private. She could make mistakes without embarrassment. She could progress at her own pace without comparison. She could have weeks where life got busy, and she barely studied without guilt. Her motivation was intrinsic rather than dependent on social validation. 2 years later, Rosa was functionally fluent. Lisa had given up after 8 months, exhausted by the performance pressure she'd created for herself. When nobody knows what you're working on, the middle phase is just work. It's not complicated by social management. You can focus entirely on the process without worrying about how it looks to others. You can persist through difficulties without the added burden of managing other people's perceptions. This is how you protect your energy for what matters. This is how you maintain the psychological resources necessary for long-term execution. This is how you ensure that the hardest parts of your journey don't become even harder because you've invited spectators into your struggle. Your energy is finite. Your attention is limited. Your mental bandwidth is precious. Don't waste these resources on social management when they should be invested in actual work. Keep your plans private, keep your focus internal, and keep your energy reserved for execution. Think about energy like a battery. You wake up each day with a certain charge. Every decision drains a little energy. Every task requires some power. Every social interaction takes bandwidth. The question is, how do you allocate this limited resource? When you've announced your plans publicly, you're spending battery power on activities that don't actually advance your goals. You're using energy to craft updates about your progress. You're burning charge to manage people's expectations. You're draining power to defend your choices against skeptics. All of this is coming out of the same battery that needs to power your actual work. When you work in silence, that battery power goes directly into productive work. You're not wasting charge on social management. You're not burning energy on explanations. You're directing all available power toward execution. The energy you protect by working in silence compounds over time. Every hour not spent on social management is an hour available for productive work. Every conversation avoided is mental bandwidth available for deep thinking. Every explanation you don't give is focus maintained on what matters. This is particularly crucial for creative work that requires deep focus. Writing, programming, designing, composing. These activities demand sustained attention. Every interruption has a cost. But beyond the immediate interruptions, there's the mental cost of maintaining an audience relationship with your work. When people are following your creative process, your work becomes public-facing even before it's complete. You start making decisions based partly on how they'll be received rather than purely on whether they serve the work. You censor yourself, not because the idea is bad, but because you're aware of how people might react. Your internal creative process becomes externally influenced. But when you work in private, the work can be what it needs to be without consideration of how it will be received before it's ready. You can explore dead ends without embarrassment. You can try radical approaches without judgment. You can be truly experimental because the laboratory is private. Protect your energy by protecting your privacy. Guard your focus by guarding your plans. Maintain your momentum by maintaining your discretion. The energy you save by working in silence is energy available for the work itself. And that energy advantage compounds into results that eventually speak for themselves. Chapter 7. The competitive advantage of discretion. In a world where everyone broadcasts everything, discretion has become a superpower. Think about how much information your competitors are giving away for free. They're posting about their struggles, which tells you their weak points. They're sharing their strategies, which tells you their playbook. They're announcing their intentions, which tells you where to position yourself to intercept them. Meanwhile, if you're practicing the discipline of silence, you're giving away nothing. You're learning from their transparency while maintaining your own strategic ambiguity. You're observing their moves while keeping your own moves hidden. You're gathering intelligence while revealing none. This information asymmetry is a massive competitive advantage. In business, in careers, in personal development, in any domain where competition exists, the person who knows more about their competitors than their competitors know about them has a decisive edge. Let me tell you about two real estate investors operating in the same market. We'll call them Kevin and Linda. Kevin was active on social media, sharing his investment philosophy, the markets he was interested in, and the types of properties he was targeting. He thought this transparency would build his brand and attract partnerships. Linda was virtually invisible online. She attended local real estate meetups occasionally, but said little about her actual investment activities. She listened more than she talked. She observed more than she shared. Here's what happened. Kevin posted about his interest in a particular up-and-coming neighborhood, explaining his thesis for why it would appreciate. Linda saw the post, did her own analysis, agreed with the thesis, and started quietly acquiring properties in that neighborhood before it became widely recognized as an opportunity. By the time Kevin finished building awareness about this neighborhood and started making offers, prices had already started rising, partly because Linda and other investors had read Kevin's analysis and acted on it. Kevin had done quality research, but given away his conclusions before he could fully capitalize on them. His transparency cost him deals and money. This pattern repeated itself. Kevin would identify opportunities, share his thinking, and then find himself competing against investors, including Linda, who were acting on his analysis. He was essentially providing free market research to his competition while simultaneously alerting them to opportunities he should have kept to himself. Linda, meanwhile, was building a portfolio quietly. She learned from observing others' successes and mistakes. She knew what Kevin was targeting because he announced it, while he had no idea what she was focused on. She operated with perfect information asymmetry. She knew everyone's playbook while revealing nothing about her own. This isn't limited to business or investing. It applies to careers too. When you broadcast your career ambitions and the specific roles or companies you're targeting, you create competition where none needed to exist. You alert others to opportunities they might not have noticed. You invite comparison when you could have been unique. Consider two people working in the same company, both interested in a lateral move to a different department. Gregory mentioned his interest to colleagues, posted on LinkedIn about his desire to transition into product management, and made it generally known that he was looking for opportunities. Emma kept her interest private. She did have conversations, but they were strategic and selective, with the hiring manager in the department she wanted to join, with one mentor who had made a similar transition, and with HR to understand the formal process. Outside of these necessary conversations, she said nothing. Here's what happened. Gregory's public interest created a situation where the hiring manager in product management suddenly had multiple candidates from within the company expressing interest. Gregory had inadvertently created competition for himself by announcing his intentions. The role became contested. Emma's discreet approach meant that by the time her application was being seriously considered, she was competing primarily against external candidates, not internal ones. She hadn't alerted other internal candidates to the opportunity by broadcasting her interest. She got the role. Gregory is still waiting for the next opening, now competing against colleagues he accidentally recruited into pursuing the same opportunity by announcing his own pursuit of it. But the advantage of discretion goes beyond information warfare. It's also about focus distribution. When you're not spending energy on broadcasting your moves, all that energy goes into making better moves. When you're not crafting the perfect announcement, you're crafting the actual product. When you're not managing your online presence, you're managing your actual progress. This creates a virtuous cycle. Discretion allows focus. Focus enables execution. Execution produces results. Results create reputation. Meanwhile, your competitors are stuck in a different cycle. Announcement requires management. Management drains focus. Lost focus degrades execution. Poor execution undermines reputation. Over time, these cycles compound. The discreet executor pulls further and further ahead while the public performer plateaus or falls behind. The gap widens not because of talent or resources, but because of fundamentally different approaches to energy allocation. And here's something counterintuitive. Being discreet often makes you more interesting when you do eventually reveal something. People are drowning in information and announcements. Everyone is shouting about what they're doing. In that environment, the person who says nothing but occasionally produces something remarkable stands out dramatically. Silence creates intrigue. Discretion generates mystique. When you're not constantly visible, your occasional appearances carry more weight. When you don't flood the zone with content and updates, your actual achievements create more impact. This is why some of the most influential people in any field are not the most vocal. They're the ones doing significant work, while others are talking about doing work. They're the ones whose rare communications carry weight precisely because they're rare. They're the ones whose achievements surprise people because nobody saw them coming. Think about Warren Buffett's approach to investing. He doesn't broadcast the stocks he's researching. He doesn't share his investment thesis before he's finished building his position. He accumulates shares quietly, reveals nothing until legally required, and only discusses his strategy after his positions are established. This discretion is strategic, not social preference. It protects his ability to act on his analysis before the market adjusts to his actions. Or consider how Apple operates. They develop products in complete secrecy with strict compartmentalization, so even employees don't know what other teams are building. This isn't about being mysterious for the sake of mystery. It's about preventing competitors from seeing what's coming and trying to beat them to market with similar products. This is the competitive advantage of discretion. Maximum impact from minimum disclosure. You're not trying to be invisible. You're trying to be strategic about what you reveal, when you reveal it, and to whom. You're not avoiding communication. You're maximizing the signal-to-noise ratio of your communication by making sure that when you do speak, you have something substantial to say. I saw this principle play out dramatically with two job seekers, both looking to transition into data science from other fields. Mark documented his learning journey extensively on LinkedIn. He posted about courses he was taking, projects he was building, and concepts he was learning. He thought this would demonstrate his commitment to potential employers. Nina learned in complete silence. She took the same courses, built similar projects, developed the same skills. But she never posted about any of it. Her LinkedIn remained static, showing only her current role. When they both started applying for data science positions, something interesting happened. Hiring managers who reviewed Mark's profile saw someone learning data science. Hiring managers who reviewed Nina's profile and then saw her portfolio saw someone who knew data science. The difference in framing was subtle but significant. Mark's public learning journey actually undermined his positioning because it emphasized that he was in transition, still learning, not yet established. Nina's silence about her learning process allowed her to reveal only completed work, creating the impression of established capability rather than emerging competence. Nina got better job offers despite having essentially identical skills as Mark. The competitive advantage came not from superior capabilities, but from superior discretion about her development of those capabilities. This is not about deception. Both Mark and Nina were genuinely developing data science skills, but by controlling when and how she revealed her capabilities, Nina positioned herself more advantageously. She let her work demonstrate her abilities rather than her learning process question her readiness. The competitive advantage of discretion compounds across every domain. In business, you move while competitors are telegraphing their moves. In careers, you position while others are announcing their positioning. In personal development, you improve while others are performing their improvement. In every case, the person maintaining discretion has more options, more flexibility, and more leverage than the person who's broadcasted their situation and intentions. This is the game within the game. While everyone else is playing the visible game of announcing and positioning and performing, you're playing the invisible game of building and executing and achieving. And by the time they realize the real game was happening where they weren't looking, you're already winning it. Chapter 8. Building in private, dominating in public. There's a reason why this principle works across every domain of achievement. Whether you're building a business, developing a skill, transforming your health, or pursuing any significant goal, the pattern is the same. The real work happens in private. The recognition happens in public. Athletes train in private and compete in public. Artists create in private and display in public. Entrepreneurs build in private and launch in public. The sequence matters. You can't shortcut the private phase by making it public. You can't substitute announcement for accomplishment. But you can optimize the private phase by protecting it from public interference. You can make the building phase more effective by keeping it focused, uninterrupted, and free from external judgment. You can ensure that when you do go public, you're revealing something complete rather than something in progress. Let me tell you about two software developers who both wanted to create a popular open source project. Terence approached it the way many developers do. He created a repository on GitHub, announced his project on various developer forums, and invited contributors before he'd built anything substantial. He thought early community involvement would accelerate development. What actually happened was that he spent enormous amounts of time responding to questions, managing expectations, defending design decisions, and coordinating with contributors who wanted to help but needed guidance. The project became more about community management than actual development. 2 years later, it was still a collection of half-finished features with no coherent vision because too many people had been involved too early. Ryan took a different approach with a similar project idea. He created a private repository and built in complete isolation for the first 6 months. No announcements, no contributors, no community. Just focused development with a clear vision. He built a complete, functional project that solved a real problem in a thoughtful way. Only after the project was complete, and he'd been using it successfully himself for months, did he open source it. He announced it with a fully functioning project, clear documentation, and a coherent vision. The community response was enthusiastic because they were seeing something complete, not something aspirational. Within a year, Ryan's project had more stars, more contributors, and more real-world adoption than Terence's project had achieved in 2 years. The difference wasn't technical skill, it was the approach. Ryan built in private until he had something worth showing. Terence tried to build in public and ended up managing a community instead of building a project. This requires a shift in how you think about sharing. Instead of sharing the process, share the outcome. Instead of documenting the journey, present the destination. Instead of performing the work, do the work, and then show what you've built. This doesn't mean you never talk about process or never share lessons from the journey. Once you've achieved something, Reflecting on how you got there can be valuable for others and clarifying for yourself. But there's a crucial difference between reflecting on a completed journey and narrating a journey in progress. When you reflect on a completed journey, you have the clarity of hindsight. You know what mattered and what didn't. You can extract genuine lessons because you've seen them through to their conclusions. You can speak with authority because you've finished what you started. When you narrate a journey in progress, you're essentially performing uncertainty. You're sharing doubts that haven't been resolved, problems that haven't been solved, obstacles that haven't been overcome. This serves neither you nor your audience well. It doesn't help you because it drains energy and invites interference. It doesn't help your audience because you're giving them incomplete information that might mislead them. Consider the difference between two authors writing their first novels. Patricia blogged extensively about her writing process. She shared word count goals, discussed plot challenges, posted about character development dilemmas. She built a small following of people interested in her journey. But the blog became almost more important than the book. She found herself writing blog posts about writing instead of actually writing. The performance of writing became more consuming than the practice of writing. Oliver wrote in complete privacy for 2 years. No blog, no updates, no audience. Just the work of writing, revising, and rewriting. When he finally finished his novel and got it published, then he started talking about it. He did author interviews about his process, but now he was speaking from the position of having completed the journey, not from the middle of it. Patricia's novel took 4 years to finish and struggled to find a publisher because the blogging had fragmented her focus and her voice. The novel felt self-conscious, written for the audience she'd built through blogging rather than for its own internal logic. Oliver's novel found a publisher relatively quickly because it was coherent, focused, and uncompromised by external influence during its creation. Build in private. Get through the messy, uncertain, difficult phases without spectators. Make your mistakes where nobody sees them. Learn your lessons without having to explain them in real time. Develop your capabilities without having to justify them. Then, when you've built something substantial, when you've achieved something real, when you've created value that exists independent of your promotion of it, that's when you go public. That's when you share. That's when you let people see what you've created. This is how you dominate. Not by being loudest, not by being most visible, but by being most effective. By doing the work that others are too busy talking about to actually do. By achieving the results that others are too distracted by their audiences to achieve. I saw this play out in a corporate context with 2 managers who both wanted to transform their department's operations. Howard created a task force, held meetings with stakeholders, sent regular updates to leadership about the transformation initiative, and made the change effort highly visible. He thought this visibility would build buy-in and demonstrate his leadership. Isabel quietly identified the core operational bottlenecks, developed solutions with her direct reports, piloted changes on a small scale, refined them based on results, and then rolled them out across the department. Leadership didn't hear about it until it was done and showing measurable improvements in performance metrics. Howard's transformation initiative became political. Different stakeholders had different opinions. Every meeting required managing conflicting priorities. The visibility he'd created meant everyone had an opinion about how the transformation should proceed. Progress was slow because every decision had to satisfy multiple constituencies. Isabel's transformation just happened. She didn't ask for permission or consensus on the approach. She just identified problems, developed solutions, and implemented them. By the time leadership fully understood what she'd done, The results were already demonstrating its value. There was nothing to debate because the proof was in the performance. Both managers were promoted, but Isabel was promoted first, and to a higher position because her approach demonstrated not just good ideas, but the ability to execute them effectively without needing constant validation or approval. This is the pattern across domains. The people who build in private and dominate in public are not necessarily smarter or more talented than those who try to build in public. They're just more strategic about energy allocation and more protective of their focus. When you build in private, you can optimize for quality without worrying about perception. You can take the time needed to get things right without pressure to show progress. You can experiment with approaches that might not work without having to explain failures. You can change direction without having to justify the change. This flexibility and freedom are what allow for the kind of deep, focused work that produces exceptional results. And when you finally go public with those results, they speak with an authority that work in progress can never match. Think about the difference between seeing an unfinished building with scaffolding and hard hats everywhere versus seeing the finished building in all its glory. Both represent the same project at different stages, but the impact is completely different. The finished building makes a statement. The building in progress just raises questions about when it will be done. You can be the finished building, but only if you're willing to keep the scaffolding private. Chapter 9. The discipline of selective sharing. There's one exception to the rule of silence, and it's an important one: strategic confidence. Doing everything completely alone isn't just difficult, it's often counterproductive. Having the right person or small group of people who know what you're working on can provide crucial benefits: genuine feedback, emotional support, accountability, and perspective. The key word here is right. Not everyone deserves access to your plans. Most people don't. But there are certain characteristics that make someone worthy of being brought into your confidence. First, they should have already achieved something similar to what you're attempting. Their experience makes their feedback valuable and their encouragement credible. When someone who's done what you're trying to do tells you it's possible, that carries weight. When someone who's never done it tells you the same thing, it's just empty positivity. Consider Julian, who wanted to transition from engineering into product management. He could have told everyone about this goal and received generic encouragement from people who had no idea what that transition actually required. Instead, he identified 3 people who had successfully made that exact transition and asked each of them if they'd be willing to mentor him informally. 2 said yes. These 2 people became his strategic confidence. They knew his goal. They knew his timeline. They knew his progress. But they were the only people who did. To everyone else, Julian was just an engineer doing his job. The value of these confidants was immeasurable. They gave him specific advice on skills to develop. They warned him about common mistakes people make during the transition. They connected him with opportunities when he was ready. They provided encouragement that was credible because it came from people who had walked the same path. If Julian had broadcast his transition goal to everyone, he would have received a lot of attention but very little useful input. Most people would have had opinions but no relevant experience. Their encouragement would have felt good but wouldn't have actually helped him make the transition more successfully. Second, your strategic confidence should have a track record of discretion. They should be someone who doesn't gossip, doesn't overshare, and respects confidentiality. Your plans are strategic assets, and you need to know they're secure when you share them. I learned this lesson watching 2 entrepreneurs with similar businesses. The first entrepreneur, Michelle, shared her business plans with several people she considered friends. One of those friends mentioned Michelle's plans casually to someone else, who mentioned it to someone else, and eventually word got back to a potential competitor who adjusted their own strategy accordingly. Michelle's strategic information leaked not through malice, but through carelessness by someone she'd trusted. The second entrepreneur, Rebecca, was much more careful. She shared her plans only with people who had proven over time that they could keep confidences. One of her criteria was simple. She never shared strategic information with someone until she'd observed them respect someone else's confidential information. If someone gossiped to her about others, she knew they'd gossip about her to others. This discretion screening protected Rebecca's strategic information. When she did share her plans, she knew they wouldn't leak because she'd chosen her confidants carefully based on their demonstrated trustworthiness. Third, strategic confidence should be genuinely supportive without being blindly positive. You don't need a cheerleader who tells you everything you do is great. You need someone who tells you the truth, who points out flaws in your thinking, challenges your assumptions, and helps you see blind spots. Because they want you to succeed, not because they want to discourage you. There's a crucial distinction here. Some people will offer criticism that's actually their fear or limitations being projected onto your situation. That's not helpful. But a strategic confidant will offer criticism that comes from experience and is aimed at making your approach more effective. Brandon learned this distinction when he started a consulting business. He initially shared his plans with his college roommate, thinking that friendship was enough qualification for being a confidant. His friend was supportive, but offered advice like, "Make sure you charge enough," and "build a good website." Generic advice that anyone could give. Later, Brandon connected with someone who ran a successful consulting business and asked if they'd mentor him. This person gave specific, sometimes uncomfortable feedback. Your positioning is too broad. You're trying to serve everyone, and you'll end up serving no one effectively. Narrow your focus. This critique came from experience and was actionable. It helped Brandon refine his strategy in ways that generic encouragement never could. Fourth, strategic confidence should have no conflict of interest with your success. They shouldn't be competing with you, envious of you, or threatened by your potential achievement. Their incentives should be aligned with your success. This seems obvious, but it's frequently overlooked. People often share their plans with colleagues who are competing for the same promotions, with peers in the same industry who might be threatened by their success, or with family members whose advice is colored by their own fears about risk. Carmen experienced this when she told a co-worker about her plan to start a side business in the same industry. She thought the co-worker was a friend and would be supportive. What actually happened was that the co-worker became subtly competitive, started undermining Carmen's confidence with concern about whether Carmen was ready, and eventually reported to their manager that Carmen seemed distracted at work. The co-worker's advice was never genuine because Carmen's success in starting a competing business was threatening to the co-worker's interests. If you can find one or two people who meet these criteria, sharing your plans with them can actually enhance your execution rather than undermining it. You get the benefits of social support without the costs of public announcement. You get feedback without interference. You get accountability without performance pressure. This is selective sharing, being strategic about who gets access to your plans and why. It's the middle path between complete secrecy and full transparency. It's recognizing that some social connection around your goals can be valuable, but only with the right people in the right way. The discipline here is in maintaining the boundary. Just because you tell one person doesn't mean you need to tell everyone. Just because you share with your strategic confidant doesn't mean you post on social media. Just because you get feedback from someone who's earned that access doesn't mean you open the floor to general opinion. Let me give you a practical framework for how to think about this. Imagine your plans existing in concentric circles of access. Inner circle, 1 to 3 strategic confidants who meet all the criteria we've discussed. These people know your detailed plans, your timeline, your challenges. You can be completely transparent with them. Middle circle, people who need to know certain aspects of your plans for practical reasons. For instance, if you're starting a business while employed, your spouse needs to know because it affects finances and time allocation. But they don't need to know every detail of your strategy. Outer circle, everyone else. They don't need to know anything until you're ready to reveal results. The mistake most people make is treating everyone like inner circle confidants. They share detailed plans with anyone who asks or shows interest. This violates the principle of selective sharing and creates all the problems we've discussed throughout this book. Keep the inner circle small and carefully selected. Keep the middle circle limited to people with legitimate need to know. Keep the outer circle completely uninformed until you're ready for public reveal. I watched a writer named Thomas execute this beautifully while working on a book. His inner circle was his agent and one fellow author who had successfully published in the same genre. His middle circle was his spouse and his day job boss, because the book was going to affect his schedule. His outer circle, which included friends, extended family, and social media connections, knew nothing about the book until it was accepted for publication. This selective approach gave Thomas everything he needed: professional feedback from his agent, craft guidance from the fellow author, practical support from his spouse, and schedule flexibility from his boss, without the costs of public announcement. When the book was published, the reveal had impact precisely because nobody outside his small circles had seen it coming. Compare this to another writer who posted constantly on social media about her book in progress. Everyone knew she was writing a book. Everyone saw her struggles. Everyone had opinions. And when the book was finally published, it felt like old news because people had been following its creation for 2 years. The reveal had no surprise, no impact, and generated minimal interest because everyone felt like they'd already been on the journey with her. Selective sharing gives you support without surveillance. It gives you feedback without fragmentation. It gives you accountability without audience. It's the optimization of the social dimension of achievement. But maintaining selectivity requires discipline. You'll be tempted to expand the circles. When you make progress, you'll want to tell more people. When someone shows interest, you'll want to bring them into your confidence. When you're excited about something, you'll want to share widely. Resist these temptations. Protect the boundaries. Keep the circles small and intentional. Remember that each person you add to your confidence is someone whose expectations you'll need to manage, whose questions you'll need to answer, and whose opinions will enter your consideration. The right 3 people who meet all the criteria are infinitely more valuable than 30 people who are just generally supportive. Quality over quantity applies to confidence even more than to most things. Your strategic confidence should be making you more effective, not more scattered. They should be adding clarity, not complexity. They should be helping you move faster, not holding you back with their own limitations. Choose carefully. Share selectively. Maintain boundaries. And remember that even with your inner circle, you don't need to share everything. You share what's useful to share, what will help you execute more effectively, what leverages their experience and perspective. Everything else stays in silence. where it's protected, where it maintains its power, where it's building toward the moment when your work speaks for itself. Chapter 10. Staying ahead. Being 3 steps ahead isn't a destination. It's a continuous practice. The moment you stop executing and start explaining, someone else starts closing the gap. The moment you become satisfied with your current position and begin broadcasting it, someone else who's still in execution mode starts overtaking you. The moment you mistake your current lead for permanent superiority, you've already begun losing it. Staying ahead requires sustained discipline. It requires continuously choosing action over announcement. It requires persistently protecting your focus from social demands. It requires repeatedly making the uncomfortable choice to work in obscurity when visibility would feel more satisfying. Let me tell you about Victor, who built a successful consulting practice through quiet execution. For 3 years, he worked in virtual anonymity, building client relationships, refining his methodology, and generating excellent results. By year 3, he was commanding premium rates and had more demand than he could handle. He had gotten 3 steps ahead of other consultants in his market through focused execution while they were busy with self-promotion. Then Victor made a decision that many successful people make. He started sharing his success publicly. He began posting on LinkedIn about his business, speaking at conferences about his methodology, and writing articles about his approach. This seemed logical. He'd achieved success. Why not share it and build his profile? What Victor didn't anticipate was the cost of this transition. The time he spent creating content was time not spent serving clients or developing his capabilities. The mental energy he spent crafting his public presence was energy not directed toward executing excellent work. The focus he put toward building his brand was focus diverted from building his business. Within a year, competitors who had been quietly observing Victor's public sharing had adopted his methodologies, undercut his pricing, and started winning clients Victor would have previously secured. His lead had been eroded not because his work declined in quality, but because he'd spent a year teaching his competition what was working for him while simultaneously being distracted from continuing to evolve his own approach. The lesson: success doesn't grant you permission to stop doing what made you successful. If discretion and focused execution got you ahead, continuing that discretion and execution is what keeps you ahead. This is hard not because the work itself is impossibly difficult, but because it goes against social instincts that are deeply programmed into us. We want to be seen. We want to be acknowledged. We want to share our progress and receive validation for it. Fighting these urges requires conscious effort every single day. But here's what makes it possible: the compound returns. Every day you choose execution over explanation, you're building something real. Every week you focus on work instead of performance, you're creating tangible progress. Every month you invest in substance rather than image, you're accumulating genuine advantages. These advantages compound over time. Small leads become bigger leads. Early wins enable bigger wins. Initial momentum generates accelerating momentum. The gap between you and the people who are still talking about starting becomes not just 3 steps, but 10 steps, then 100 steps, then they're not even visible in your rearview mirror anymore. Consider the story of 2 investors who both started with similar capital and similar knowledge around the same time. Investor A was active on Twitter, sharing his investment thesis, discussing his portfolio, analyzing market trends publicly. He built a following and felt like he was establishing himself as a thought leader in investing. Investor B remained virtually invisible. He invested quietly, learned from his mistakes privately, and refined his approach without commentary. Every hour, Investor A spent crafting tweets about investing. Investor B spent analyzing potential investments. Every bit of mental energy Investor A directed toward his Twitter presence, Investor B directed toward understanding businesses. 5 years later, Investor B had significantly outperformed Investor A in returns. The difference wasn't intelligence or initial capital. It was focus allocation. Investor A had built a Twitter following but mediocre returns. Investor B had built wealth but remained anonymous. Only one of them had achieved the actual goal of investing, which is generating returns, not generating attention. This is the long-term payoff of short-term discipline. This is how consistent execution in private creates undeniable results in public. This is how staying quiet while you work leads to loud recognition once you're done. But there's something even more important than the external results, the internal transformation. When you consistently choose focused work over social performance, you're not just building external achievements, you're building character, discipline, and self-trust. You're proving to yourself that you can do hard things without external validation. You're developing the capacity to sustain effort even when nobody's watching. You're becoming the kind of person who finishes what they start. This internal transformation is the real prize. The achievements are great, but they come and go. The person you become in the process of achieving them, that's permanent. That's portable. That's what enables your next achievement and the one after that. When you can work in silence, you can work anywhere. When you can execute without external validation, you can execute under any circumstances. When you can stay focused despite social pressure to perform, you can stay focused through any distraction. This is what it really means to be 3 steps ahead. It's not just about being ahead of other people. It's about being ahead of who you used to be. It's about being ahead of your old habits, your old need for approval, your old tendency to substitute talking for doing. Every day you're competing with 2 versions of yourself, the version who wants to announce plans and the version who wants to execute them. The version who wants immediate social validation and the version who wants long-term substantial results. The version who wants to perform ambition and the version who wants to achieve goals. Choose the second version. Every single day, choose execution over explanation. Every single moment, choose work over words. Every single time you feel the urge to announce what you're going to do, redirect that energy into actually doing it. That's how you stay 3 steps ahead. Not by being faster than everyone else, but by moving while they're standing still. Not by being smarter than everyone else, but by focusing while they're distracted. Not by being better than everyone else, but by working while they're talking. Because someone is always working in silence while you're talking. Someone is always executing while you're explaining. Someone is always building their next achievement while you're broadcasting your last one. If you want to stay ahead, you need to operate as if you're still behind. This mindset, always operating as if you're behind even when you're ahead, is what separates people who achieve temporary success from people who build lasting excellence. You don't become complacent. You don't start believing your own press. You don't let success make you soft. I'll leave you with one final story. 2 entrepreneurs built competing businesses in the same industry. The first achieved early success, celebrated publicly, and spent increasing amounts of time at conferences, on podcasts, and in media interviews talking about his success. He enjoyed the recognition and felt he'd earned the right to be visible. The second entrepreneur also achieved early success, but remained focused on execution. He declined most media opportunities. He skipped conferences that didn't directly serve his business. He stayed in building mode even after initial success, continuously improving his product, deepening customer relationships, and expanding capabilities. 5 years later, the second entrepreneur had built a business 10 times larger than the first. The first entrepreneur had become somewhat famous in his industry, but his business had plateaued. He'd optimized for visibility and personal brand. The second had optimized for actual business building. Only one of them achieved sustainable success. That's the choice you face every day. Visibility or substance. Performance or execution. Talking or doing. The choice seems obvious when stated that way, but in practice the pull toward visibility, performance, and talking is constant and strong. Resist it. Stay in execution mode. Protect your focus. Guard your energy. Maintain your discipline. Work in silence. Build in private. Let results speak for themselves. That's how you stay 3 steps ahead, not just today, but for years to come. Not just in one domain, but in everything you pursue, not just ahead of others, but ahead of who you used to be. While they're talking about doing it, you're not just doing it, you're already 3 steps beyond it, building your next achievement while they're still announcing their first intention. That's not arrogance. That's not luck. That's the natural result of sustained, disciplined, focused execution in silence. That's how you win. Conclusion: the silent revolution. This approach to achievement, building in private, revealing in public, executing while others deliberate, isn't just a personal strategy. It's a revolution against a culture that's become obsessed with performance over substance, image over reality, talking over doing. We live in an age of unprecedented visibility. Social media has created an environment where everyone is expected to broadcast everything. We're supposed to share our thoughts in real time, document our days constantly, perform our lives for an audience that's simultaneously doing the same thing. In this environment, silence feels radical. Privacy feels rebellious. Discretion feels like a statement. And in a way, it is. It's a statement that your worth isn't determined by your visibility. It's a declaration that your progress doesn't require documentation. It's a commitment to valuing substance over performance. This silent revolution isn't about rejecting connection or community. It's about being selective about what you share and when. It's about understanding that not everything needs to be public, that not every thought needs to be posted, that not every plan needs to be announced. It's about reclaiming your attention from the endless demands of social performance and redirecting it toward actual achievement. It's about choosing to be someone who does things rather than someone who talks about doing things. It's about prioritizing your progress over your image. The world doesn't need more announcements. It needs more achievement. It doesn't need more promises. It needs more delivery. It doesn't need more performance. It needs more substance. You can be part of the solution instead of part of the noise. You can be someone who changes the calculus of success by demonstrating that quiet work produces loud results. You can be living proof that discretion is powerful, that silence is strategic, that execution beats explanation every time. This is your invitation to join the silent revolution. Stop talking about what you're going to do. Start doing it. Stop explaining your plans. Start executing them. Stop performing your ambitions. Start achieving your goals. While they're talking about doing it, be 3 steps ahead. Not because you announced that you would be, but because you quietly chose to be. Not because you promoted your plan, but because you executed it. Not because you performed your journey, but because you completed it. This is how you win, not by being loudest, not by being most visible, not by getting the most likes or followers or attention, but by doing the work that matters, building something real, and letting your results speak volumes while you stay quiet. The choice is yours. You can keep announcing your plans and wondering why they never materialize. Or you can start protecting your plans, executing them in silence, and watching them transform from ideas into reality. While they're talking about doing it, you're already 3 steps ahead. Now go prove it. Epilogue. The practice. Knowing these principles and actually living them are 2 different things. Here's how to bridge that gap. Starting today, practice these disciplines. When you feel the urge to announce a goal, write it down in a private journal instead. Channel the energy you would have spent on the announcement into planning your first concrete action step. Then take that step immediately. When someone asks what you're working on, develop a polite but vague response that satisfies their curiosity without revealing your strategy. Working on some interesting projects or staying busy with a few things works perfectly fine. You don't owe anyone a detailed explanation. When you achieve something, let others discover it before you announce it. Share the result, not the plan. Document the outcome, not the process. Present the finished product, not the work in progress. When you're tempted to post about your progress on social media, remember that the dopamine hit you get from likes and comments is the same reward your brain would get from actual achievement. Don't shortcut your motivation by spending it on social validation. When you're in the difficult middle phase of a project and feeling discouraged, remind yourself that nobody knows you're struggling because nobody knows you're building anything. You have the freedom to fail, pivot, or persist without social pressure. Use that freedom. These practices will feel unnatural at first. You'll have to fight your instincts constantly. You'll feel invisible sometimes. You'll wonder if anyone notices your discipline. You'll be tempted to break your silence just to feel acknowledged. Don't. Stay the course. Trust the process. Keep working in private. Keep executing in silence. Keep building without broadcasting. Because here's what will happen. 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, you'll have achieved things that the people who were talking about their plans are still just talking about. You'll have results that others only have intentions for. You'll have proof that others only have promises for. And when people ask how you did it, you can tell them the truth. While they were talking about doing it, you were already 3 steps ahead. Not because you're special, because you chose execution over explanation. Not because you're lucky, because you chose work over words. Not because you're different, because you chose silence over noise. That's the practice. That's the path. That's how you win. Now close this audiobook and go do the work that only you can do. Do it quietly. Do it consistently. Do it until it's undeniable. While they're talking about doing it, you're already 3 steps ahead. Prove it. A final word. The principles in this audiobook aren't complex. They're actually quite simple. Work in private, reveal results, protect your focus, maintain discipline, execute while others deliberate. The difficulty isn't in understanding these principles. It's in practicing them consistently when every social instinct and cultural pressure is pulling you in the opposite direction. You now have a choice. You can close this audiobook and immediately post about what you learned, what you're going to apply, how you're going to implement these principles. You can announce to your social media followers that you're going to start working in silence and letting results speak. You can tell everyone about your plan to stop telling everyone about your plans. The irony would be almost poetic. Or you can actually apply what you've learned. You can close this audiobook and say nothing about it. You can take these principles and implement them without announcement. You can let your future results be the only evidence that you listened. One approach feels satisfying immediately but undermines the entire message. The other feels like nothing is happening but sets you on the path to everything you want to achieve. The choice reveals whether you understood the message or just consumed content. Whether you're committed to change or just performing the consideration of change, whether you're serious about winning or just comfortable with the appearance of ambition. I can't make the choice for you. No one can. This is the moment where you decide who you're going to be. Someone who talks about being 3 steps ahead, or someone who actually is 3 steps ahead. Someone who announces they're going to work in silence, or someone who simply works in silence. Someone who posts about letting results speak, or someone whose results actually speak. The world is full of the first kind of person. They're everywhere, constantly visible, always announcing, perpetually performing. The world is desperately short of the second kind of person. They're rare because the discipline is hard and the satisfaction is delayed. Which kind will you be? Your answer won't be in what you say. It will be in what you do when no one is watching. It will be in what you build when no one knows you're building it. It will be in what you achieve when no one expected you to achieve anything because they didn't know you were attempting anything. That's where your answer lives. In the silence, in the work, in the discipline, in the execution. While they're talking about doing it, you're already 3 steps ahead. That's not a prediction, that's not a hope. That's a choice you make every day, with every decision about whether to announce or to execute, whether to explain or to work, whether to broadcast or to build. Choose well. Choose silence. Choose execution. Choose results. While they're talking about doing it, you're already 3 steps ahead. Now prove it.